Next thing is timing and fuel rate per degree. When we talk about common rail, and here's a question for you actually, when we want to do a petrol car and we want to hot it up and make it go faster, everybody knows the first thing we do is advance the ignition timing. In a diesel, however, well, I don't know if you guys have ever thought about that, but obviously when the piston's coming up through the stroke, people, 40 degrees advance is not that uncommon in a petrol car. In performance applications anyway. Have you ever thought that we're burning the fuel off and creating all this extra pressure, which is actually fighting the piston? We're actually pushing the piston back down and not creating horsepower, which is when we push the piston back down the other side and extract our torque. So it's actually a little bit backwards. The reason why we do it in a petrol butt is because the air and the fuel is already locked. That went in with the air inlet back down here when the piston was at TDC and the inlet valve closed. So everything that we can get in that cylinder is already in that cylinder. So if we start the fire process here, we can be assured that it's all burnt by there and that we've actually got the maximum cylinder temperature that we can get, which is therefore expanding everything and exerting maximum pressure for when this thing comes down the other side. But there's a lot of negative energy done in that advanced position. When we talk about modern diesel, however, we can actually vary the amount of fuel per degree that we put in there. So we're actually varying the physics play from the very start. We can vary the rail pressure, we can vary the duration, and because we're injecting it directly into the cylinder, we're not kind of locked by these laws of physics that used to happen before. So modern diesels these days actually inject the bulk of their fuel, or their main injection stroke will actually start after TDC. Two reasons for it. One is the main emission that they're trying to stop is NOx. And NOx only happen when the combustion temperature hits over 600 or so, 650 degrees C. So they're trying to limit the amount of heat that they put inside that cylinder so they can keep their NOx count under control. That's why they put exhaust gas recirculation in, because exhaust gas is already oxygen that's been burnt off. It's essentially inert gas. It can't burn it again. So what happens is they put that gas in there. When it compresses, it doesn't generate as much heat, but it doesn't provide as much oxygen as it can inside that cylinder. So then obviously it doesn't create the NOx on the other side. But the other thing that they do is rather inject say 0.2 of a cc per degree over 25 degrees, start it at 15 and finish it at 10 afterwards, they just put, 0.2 by 25 gives us 5 cc's. They just put 2 cc's per degree over, half, maths is a bit wrong this afternoon. They just put half a cc in per degree over 10 degrees. And what that does is that stops a certain amount of fuel expanding whilst it's still trying to compress it and superheating the combustion process. It doesn't happen anymore. So we've now got a situation where everything happens after TDC, which is actually really, really cool. And for those who can't really quite get their heads around it, Matty from Just Autos is pulling something like 470 wheel horsepower out of a KUN 26 Hilux, just a standard 1KD. He's pushing about 60 pounds of boost to do it, and a bucket load of fuel nonetheless, but they're all doing it without any modifications to the engine, where if you were to do that with a petrol car and triple the factory or quadruple the factory power output, you'd have to be throwing big rods at it and forged pistons and all these sorts of things, because they need to be able to deal with the heat. They need to be able to deal with the loads and the stresses that are put on the engine, because they're burning a bucket load of fuel and they're burning and creating a bucket load of temperature whilst the piston is still coming up. So they need to put strong rods in it because they're fighting it. Where modern diesels, okay, there's obviously a lot of cylinder pressure going on in Matty Smith's Hilux, but it's all cylinder pressure after TDC. So they're not fighting the conrod, they're not trying to bend a conrod, they're just simply helping it go back down the cylinder again. So it's actually a really, really cool and good system when we start talking about diesel tuning. We get to the next point, however. I call it the delta degree, and the delta degree does change, but essentially there's a theoretical number that says, you know, somewhere around about 35 degrees after TDC, you can put all the fuel in you like and it's not going to make any difference. And essentially, common rail, although we can vary the rail pressure, which gives us a varying fuel rate per degree, when we get to 1600 bar or 1800 bar, whatever the rail pressure is, that's the most amount of fuel per degree we can get in. Now, the next thing is we can lengthen out the duration of injection, which happens in some rail pressure chips. Steinbauer is the most obvious one, where it will only vary the duration. But if our start of timing figure is fixed and we're not going to be touching the start of timing injection, that means the only way we can vary or lengthen out the injection stroke is as the piston's running down the stroke. Obviously, this is on a circle, right? So 10 degrees up here means that we've got very, very little vertical movement. 10 degrees between here and here gives us a shitload of movement. So what happens is, the further down this stroke you get, the faster the piston is accelerating away. Now, we know diesel has only a certain cetane rating. It's a slow burning fuel. We can only burn so much of it. And with injection pressure and the flow rate of the nozzle, we can only inject so much of it anyway. So essentially 35 degrees after TDC, it's a delta. And like I said, it changes with engine stroke, nozzle flow rates and rail pressure. But essentially it's somewhere around that 35 degrees after TDC. You're done all your pushing of that piston you're going to do. After that point, that piston's starting to run down that cylinder far faster than you can put any real more fuel and make an effect on it.